Breaking news, the full product briefing including images and specs for the new Canon R7 and R10 have leaked, and people are mad. I'm going to tell you all about it. We're going to look through the pictures in detail. First, I want to thank Sony Alpha Rumors for leaking this. First, let's look at the pictures of the R10. This is the smaller of the two new APS-C mirrorless cameras using Canon's RF mount. This picture shows the new kit lens, the 18-150 attached. That's the lens I would recommend. Do not get the 18-45. Looking at the next picture, I see something shocking. I've never seen it on a Canon before. A physical autofocus, manual focus switch on the body. In the past, Canon has always put the autofocus switch on the lens, but the challenge is when you're like me and you shoot with several different lenses, the autofocus switch is in a different place on every lens, so your fingers don't automatically find it. If you look closely at the top, you can see that this has a pop-up flash, not unlike my little M50 here. Canon says it's going to be 0.95 pounds or 429 grams. That is just a hair lighter than the full-frame Canon RP. You can see we aren't gaining too much by going down to APS-C. The height seems to be about the same, but if we measure the width, you can see the new R10 is less wide than the RP. But what if we compare it to the APS-C M50 that this seems to be the direct descendant of? We can see, again, the height is about the same, but the new R10 is about 0.1 pounds heavier. And if we stack them vertically, we can see the new R10 is just a little bit wider. This is a close-up of the new 18-45 kit lens, the one you should not buy. Here's why you should not buy the 18-45 kit lens. It just doesn't have enough of a zoom range. And the reason people buy cameras like this nowadays are for things like sports and wildlife, and 18-150, really a very useful range. The Canon M mount equivalent of this is 15-45. That gives this about 24 millimeters at the wide end, but this lens is going to be about 29 millimeters at the wide end. Why is this a problem? I find that focal range of 24 millimeters to 29 millimeters to be so useful. It's what most people will be vlogging with. So if you want to vlog, you'd have to get a wider angle lens, and the only RF native mount lens is Canon's 14-35 f4. That's the least expensive one at $1,700. And that would give you a focal range of 22-56, f6.4, 35 millimeter full frame equivalent. And that's a pretty good range, but you're looking at what will probably be an $800 camera and then spending $1,700 on a lens, and it just doesn't make sense. The other lens is this 18-150, and you can see it's a bigger lens. It's widest at the base, since I think it is an M-mount lens that was designed for an APS-C mount, but then adapted to Canon's full frame mount. We see the characteristic RF control ring at the end, which you can program to do different things, such as adjust your aperture. Here are the specs. The pictures don't actually show that it has a flip screen, but I strongly suspect that it does. It's going to be 24 megapixels, just like the Canon M50. Unfortunately, it will not have sensor stabilization, and that leads me to believe the two lenses that we just saw will probably have optical image stabilization. Here's the first thing people are really mad about. The EVF is pretty low quality at only 2.36 million dots. Now, each dot is technically 1/3 of a pixel. Like, there's a red dot, a green dot, and a blue dot that make up a single pixel. That means the actual resolution is about 1024 by 768. And if you were to look at a 1024 by 768 monitor, it would seem extremely outdated. So when you use the viewfinder, especially concentrating on small subjects, things will look pixelated. It just makes photography a little bit less pleasurable experience. Still, this is a pretty standard electronic viewfinder for low-end entry-level cameras, but it is kind of a drawback compared to getting a DSLR, which has a nice, perfectly sharp optical viewfinder. The bigger disappointment for me is that the rear screen is a very lowly 720 by 480. For those of us spoiled by the Retina displays on our iPhone, this is going to look blocky and outdated. I think the R10 kit with that basic 18-45 is going to be $800, and if you get the 18-150, it'll probably be $1,000. If they sell the body alone, which I'm not sure they need to, since you would need an APS-C lens that does not yet exist, I think that price would be $700. I think it's going to be just a little bit more than the Canon M50 Mark II is selling for now to accommodate the crazy inflation that we've been experiencing. Now let's look at the camera I'm really excited about, the Canon R7. Now that we have pictures, we know that this is not an evolution of the Canon 7D Mark II that became famous as being a baby 1D for sports and wildlife photographers. Instead, it's more directly linked to the Canon 70, 80D, 90D lineup, in that it is more consumer-oriented rather than professional-oriented. And I'll tell you a few reasons why. Like, for one, look at that big mode dial. It is taking the place where the usual LCD screen would go on the 7D Mark II. However, they did not include the pop-up flash. The pop-up flash is reserved for really the more entry-level cameras. Here's the full front view, and once again, you can see that it has that AF/MF switch. How does the size compare to Canon's DSLRs? The 90D that this evolves from is significantly bigger, and the weight is 0.2 of a pound lighter. But there's a catch. The electronic viewfinder on the R7 is huge. It projects back so far. Look at this side view. Compare this side view to the 90D, and you can see it's actually a deeper camera that won't quite fit in your bag as easily. Why did they make the electronic viewfinder so huge? I think we can get a hint from my $6,000 Canon R3 here. This has a huge projecting viewfinder because it has the eye tracking autofocus system built into it. Eye tracking autofocus moves the autofocus point wherever you look, and it makes it extremely easy to focus on different parts of the picture, at least in theory. My problem with the eye tracking on the R3 is that it's simply not reliable. You have to recalibrate it basically every time you pick the camera up, or the lighting changes, or it becomes unreliable and frustrating. Looking at the back of the R7, we see some weird things. First, it definitely has a flip screen. The big weird thing is the combination of the joystick and the rear control dial here. Now you can adjust exposure compensation and your focusing point from a single control without having to move your thumb to another part of the camera. But there's a big drawback. The control is not in the same place as cameras like the Canon R5, R6, Canon R3, where this might be a second body for those photographers. So if you are shooting with one of those cameras, your fingers will have to relearn how to use it, and that makes it difficult to use as a backup body. Here are the specs that were leaked by Canon rumors earlier. It has a 32.5 megapixel APS-C sensor. This is straight out of the 90D. We don't have any reason to think that it has improved. So if you like this but you want a cheaper price, you might consider picking up a 90D. It also has sensor stabilization. Like the R5 and R6, this will mean any lens you use is stabilized. It's really useful not just for low light, but for things like wildlife and sports to reduce the number of shaky shots that you get. The mechanical shutter is rumored to shoot at 15 frames per second, which is mind-blowing. That's 5 more than the 7D series cameras did. But the electronic shutter, which can shoot silently, will do 30 frames per second. That's really where the beauty of this comes in. For sports and wildlife photographers who want to stop the action, who want to catch the moment between the moments, that one split-second decisive moment when the bat hits the ball, this is going to be the perfect camera. One big drawback, though, while it has 2 memory cards, they're both UHS 2 SD cards, and those have a very slow write speed compared to the higher performance CF Express cards. So you have 30 frames per second with a 30 megapixel sensor. That is generating a lot of data, but it can't write it quickly to those 2 SD cards if you're shooting RAW. That means things are going to get backed up. That means if you shoot for a few seconds of action, you might have to wait 10 or 15 seconds for all that data to unload to the card. It's going to be buffering that whole time. I wish this had been derived from the 7D series, which had a bigger CF Express card slot, allowing you to write that data faster. Like the M10, it has the lower resolution 2.36 million dot viewfinder, which is only 1024 by 768. That's pretty standard for low-end APS-C cameras, but I would not recommend that for wildlife, because when I use a low-resolution viewfinder for wildlife, well, you're often watching a bird that's taking up only a very small part of that viewfinder. So you're concentrating on a small part of that low-resolution screen, and it ends up looking pixelated. And the pictures are going to turn out just fine, but for me, it ruins the enjoyment of it. So I would still rather have an optical viewfinder or something like the 9 million dot viewfinders that we have on cameras like my Sony A1. The rear screen is better than that on the R10, but it's still only 920 by 640, so it will be noticeably low resolution. My disappointments on this are, there's no top screen, there's no CF Express, the EVF is really, really weak. I just think they should have called it an R70 instead of an R7 because I still want my mirrorless 7D. That would be more like the R3. Give me that high resolution viewfinder. Give me that CF Express card slot. Still, the R7 is a camera for the masses. It won't appeal to the hardcore wildlife photographers as much as my imaginary camera, but it will appeal to mom or dad going through Target and picking out a good camera to take pictures of their kids' sports. I'm adjusting my price estimate down. I now think the R7 will be positioned at about $1,500, which will make it more expensive than the $900,000 Canon RP, which happens to be full frame, but it will still be pretty much on par with cameras like the 90D that it's closely related to. Both these cameras launch officially tomorrow, but in the comments down below, I'd like to hear what you think about them. Do you want to buy them? Are you excited about them? Or did Canon go in the wrong direction? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's free, it helps support us, and you'll get to see our full upcoming review of both of these cameras. Bye.